Good morning. How the devil are you doing this fine day? Hope you're all fit and well. It's going to be a long week for me, even though I won't be here on Friday. Not only do we have two more morning shows, that's three if you count this one, we also have two, not one, but two evening shows for you to look forward to as well. I'll be telling you more about both a bit later in the show, but for now, just mark these dates and times in your diary. 7 p.m. on Wednesday, we'll be featuring all things electric. And at 7 p.m. on Thursday, we'll be bringing you the world premiere of our new top-down way film, featuring those fine folks over at Despo that we shot over in Milan a couple of weeks ago. Now, I realise you have lives and commitments, but I'd love for you to join us for both shows. The Thursday show will be quite short, actually, so the film itself is only about 11 minutes long, although I'm happy to take comments and questions as long as you care to fire them, to be perfectly honest with you. I do owe a very quick apology to Mick Norton. And Mick, I know you sent me an email. Well, good morning, Mick, by the way. I know you sent me an email this morning. I've literally, I put today's show together last night, so I've literally dashed into the office to start, and I haven't had a chance to read it, and I will get to it after the show. But if you'd like to, if it's something that you want to share on the show, please feel free to do so in the chat. Good morning to Gary Muirhead, who, as usual, is the provider of our question of the day. Now, a very quick reminder, you can have your say on today's show in the usual way. Just type comments and questions and anything else into the chat. But if you'd like to lend your voice to the show, you can also leave us a voicemail that we may or may not use on a future episode. To leave us that voicemail, just use the link that I'm posting in the chat right about when I can find the right button. There you are. It is speakpipe.com/demolition news. Just leave us an MP3 voicemail message, and if it's appropriate, we'll use it on the show. Now, without further ado, let me roll the intro, post Gary's question of the day, and get the show very much on the road. It is Tuesday, the 17th of October. Welcome to the House of Fun that is the Breakfast Show. I am your host, Mark Anthony. In today's show, architects are waging a war on demolition. So where is the demolition response? Why BCL Groundworks goes back to Hitachi again and again and again. We're celebrating 10 years of intelligent machine control with Komatsu, and we're reveling in the sounds of nature with Volvo. Plus, we're going to take a closer look at the Bobcat L95 compact wheel loader that I took for a spin over in Czech Republic earlier this year. But first, let's peer back through the mists of time to see what was happening on this day in history. I can't help thinking people would like it, or some people would like a repeat of this one. On this day in 1814, a burst brewery vat sent 300,000 gallons of ale into the streets of London. 8 people were killed in the London beer flood, and a 9th died later from alcohol poisoning. 300,000 gallons of booze flowing down the streets. Gangster Al Capone was found guilty of tax evasion on this day. I can't actually see the date on that, but we'll move on. In 1943, the Burma Railways was completed by Allied prisoners of war and Asian labourers. That was the bridge over the River Kwai, if you remember that. In 1957, the movie Jailhouse Rock premiered in Memphis, home of its star, Elvis Presley. In 1968, the iconic Steve McQueen movie Bullet was released, and on this day in 2000, remember this one well, a train crashed at Hatfield in Hertfordshire, killing 4 people and injuring 70 more. That crash would lead ultimately to the collapse of railway operator Railtrack. I had a few bits and pieces arriving in the chat. We'll come to all of that in just a second. But before we get into the real meat of the show, let me very quickly remind you of our question of the day. Yes, our resident quizmaster, Gary Muirhead, has come up with question gold again. His question of today is simply this: what is your most significant career accomplishment? Mine, aside from starting my own company, I would guess would be winning a UK-wide social media marketing award for our use of video way back in 2009. And that was before Fred came along and before I'd even discovered live streaming. But what about you? Is there a card you carry that gives you a special feeling of pride? Did you gain an unexpected qualification? Were you selected to work on a high-profile project or on an unusual machine? Let us know in the chat. We'll come back to that at the very end of the show. But before then, we need to do some of this. Okay, we have lots of sexy plant and equipment to show you a bit later in the show, but first I'd like to show you something else. If you watch this show regularly, or if you read my weekly columns over at Demolition Insider, you'll know that I have a serious concern about the rising tide of anti-demolition feeling in certain camps. Feels like architects, academics, politicians and environmentalists are using embodied carbon concerns to effectively push demolition to the sidelines. One such example is the retro first movement being led by the Architects Journal magazine. And this is what it's all about.
Food waste, fast fashion, the endless quest for the latest phone. We all know our throwaway culture plays a big part in the climate crisis. But did you know that the demolition and replacement of buildings is also fueling the crisis? And did you know that our tax system rewards this wasteful approach while making the reuse of buildings more costly? In the UK, we lose more than 50,000 buildings a year through demolition. Of the 200,000 tonnes of waste we produce each year, almost 2/3 is construction waste. And largely because of this waste of resources, the construction industry contributes an estimated 10% of the UK's annual carbon emissions. Think of all the energy that goes into a building constructed from scratch. A process which gobbles up fossil fuel hungry cement, steel, aluminium and plastic. More than 1/3 of the lifetime carbon emissions of a typical new build office development will already have been emitted upon completion, while the figure for a new residential block is over half. Unlike the day-to-day energy costs of a building, which are spread out over its entire lifetime, construction emissions are happening right now. In the 10-year window the UN tells us we have to slash greenhouse gases and keep global warming below 1.5 degrees centigrade. And perversely, the rules encourage this. The standard 20% rate of VAT is charged on most refurbishment work, while much new build construction, including housing, attracts a rate of 0. Yes, you heard that right. Despite all the declarations of climate emergency, our tax system makes wasteful demolition and rebuild cheap, and sustainable refurbishment and retrofit expensive. But what if we pursued a new approach to design and construction? One based on reusing what we already have. That is what's proposed by the Retro First campaign, launched by the Architects Journal and now supported across the country. The campaign calls on government to do 3 things. First, to cut VAT on refurbishment to 5% or even 0, an option that's now available to the UK since Brexit. Second, to amend policy to promote the reuse of existing buildings to high standards. And third, to insist that all publicly funded projects look to retrofit solutions first. You can find out more by Googling Retro First. And you can support Retro First by contacting your MP and your local councillors about the campaign, and using hashtag RetroFirst on social media. Retro First, the greenest building is one that already exists.
Now, there's a lot I could say in defense of the demolition industry, but ultimately I'd be doing so as a journalist sat on the very outer edge of the industry. So, where is the actual industry's response to this threat? Why are they not fighting fire with fire? Where is the demolition industry video highlighting its recycling accomplishments and showcasing how it is a provider of materials, vital materials for the construction sector? The demolition industry is in danger of being washed away purely because it's not putting its head above the parapet.
If you are enjoying this episode, please consider supporting the show. You can leave us a tip at buymeacoffee.com/demolition news.
Okay, people, I promised you some sexy kit, and sexy kit you shall jolly well have. First off, we're calling by BCL Groundworks to see why they keep going back for Hitachi excavators time and time and time again.
BCL Groundworks was formed in 2009 by myself, predominantly a civil engineering and groundworks operation. We mainly undertake civils jobs, housing projects throughout the southwest. I've owned every machine from 1998, every series, from the Dash 1 to the current Dash 7, which is the ZX225-7 that you see behind me. So from my early involvement as an operator, I found the Hitachis to be fast, fluid, powerful and very responsive, far superior than any other machine I had operated at the time. Our outgoing Hitachi ZX225-6 proved to be our most reliable long-term machine we'd owned and operated. We decided to change it for the newer version, which is the Hitachi ZX225-7, and then within that we chose to install the latest Hitachi connected technologies. We chose Hitachi connected technologies for the Leica GPS machine control system. We also had installed the X-Watch 5, which is the RCI rated capacity indicator with height restriction and slew restriction, and we've also had fitted the Encon tilt rotating system. The benefits of having the GPS machine control, purely health and safety really, mainly to keep personnel away from the machine while operating. The Encon tilt rotating system has the benefit of working in confined space, having the ability to follow contours around the site. And then we have the height restriction and the slew restriction, also health and safety related, working in tight areas and under height restrictions. I would recommend Hitachi Connected Technologies based on it's a one-stop shop. We've got one point of contact for all our after-sales training and technical inquiries.
Yeah, cool of a film, and you can actually see why BCL are such big fans of the Hitachi brand. Now, I'll throw back to the chat. Jim Turner is in agreement with the Retro First film from the Architects Journal. Absolutely spot on bit of footage. Plenty of very sound shells of buildings that will be much better repurposed sooner than knocked down. Don't necessarily argue with that, but what the Architects Journal is looking for is this idea of retro first. So effectively, rather than proving that it can't be repurposed, they are requiring you to explain why it needs to be demolished. All to do with planning. And we'll come back to that in just a second because Dan Cullen makes a point here. I think this reuse building is a farce. The buildings built are office use, and these office buildings are over 20 years old, so their lifespan is complete. And that's where I start to have a problem, because the planning system in the UK is predominantly slow and cumbersome and unwieldy. So if you've got an office block, and there's one very close to me that I'm very familiar with, it's an office block that could potentially be turned into housing, which we need. You know, the country needs housing, but to get that through planning, to get that up to spec, is that actually a viable way forward? Is that a viable way forward? And that's where I come in. I don't think we can actually have what the architects and the environmentalists are looking for is this like blanket ban of no more demolition. It needs to be a case by case. And if it's going to be a case by case, we need to improve the understanding at the planning stage and at governmental stage as well, so that we don't get things like the Marks and Spencer's building in Oxford Street being kicked back up the line and being decided almost arbitrarily. That's my point in any case. Now, we've just seen Hitachi, so why don't we go from one Japanese giant to another? We'll be right back after this. Can you believe that it's been 10 years since Komatsu first unleashed its intelligent machine control system onto the market? It is 10 years, and the company has marked that decade of innovation with a brand new film. It's amazing to me just how quickly this industry has adapted to this kind of technology. I remember writing about the intelligent machine control system when it first landed, and I remember thinking the UK is a cost-driven plant hire market. This will never fly. Shows what I know. Now look, not only is Komatsu celebrating 10 years of IMC, but just about every major manufacturer has a similar system in its armory too. So happy 10th birthday to IMC. Imagine what you'll look like when you grow up. Let's have a look. Jim Turner says we need planning to build a building that we have to prove a good reason for what we want and how it should look. So planning should be needed to flatten the building as it's stored carbon. It is stored carbon. But when you think that apparently, and I'm doing this completely off the top of my head, when it was decided that Marks and Spencer's flagship store on Oxford Street was not to be demolished and it was to be retained and refurbished, apparently the carbon payback of a new build would have been achieved in 11 years. I mean, that bearing in mind that building as it exists at the moment is 150, 200 years old. So we weren't willing to wait 11 years to get our carbon back or break even on carbon, even though the building will be there for possibly 100, 200 years. That doesn't make sense to me. So there's my point. Anyway, let's have a look. I tell you what, we'll come back to the chat in just a second. But first, one of these, because I've got more to show you.
Since the finance bill came into effect in April, the construction industry has seen a surge of fuel thefts. The rising cost of living has placed an additional risk of theft by employees and contractors, as well as opportunistic thieves. By using diesel dye and placing warnings of its use, you are sending a clear message that this is your fuel.
Now, tomorrow night at 7 p.m, we will be hosting a live show dedicated to all things electric earth-moving equipment. I realise some of you still have serious reservations about electric machines, but there can be no denying They really are whisper quiet. Yeah, if you'd like a bit more like that, please join us tomorrow, 7 p.m. tomorrow night, for a show in which we showcase a broad spectrum of electric-powered machines. And that is not all. At 7 p.m. on Thursday, we will host the premiere of our new film featuring the top-downway system from Italian demolition giant Despe. The film is just over 11 minutes long, and it will go live on YouTube at precisely 7 p.m. on Thursday as well. But at the same time, we're going to host a second evening live show featuring the very same film. So if you want to watch it, you can do so over on YouTube. But if you'd like to ask questions, talk about it, then please join us here, wherever you're watching this show, for what do we call it? Yeah, the movie is called The Fourth Way, which will make perfect sense when I explain it to you. But yes, that's coming on Thursday. So electrics on Wednesday, high-rise demolition, should I say, on Thursday. It's a mixed bag.
If you would like to buy a limited edition Break Fast show sticker, head on over to buymeacoffee.com/demolition news/extras.
So next up, we're going to take a closer look at the Bobcat L95 compact wheel loader. I had the enormous pleasure of taking one of these for a spin over in the Czech Republic earlier this year, so I'm already sold on the machine. But if anybody is still sitting on the fence, this is what it can do. Yeah, really is a terrific little machine. If you ever get a chance to take one for a spin, I'd recommend it. If you get a chance to take it for a spin in the Czech Republic, I'd recommend that even more. Now, there is no gripe of the day today because I wanted to leave space for one more film. And that film comes from Breakfast Show favourites Sennabogen. Take a look at this. Pretty cool, right? That pretty much wraps up the main part of this morning's show. I'm going to roll the outro in just a second before leaping gazelle-like over into the chat to see what you're all saying today. If you can't stick around for that, then please stay safe, look after yourself, your family, your friends, and your colleagues. Please do that. And wrap up warm because it's quite chilly out there. But if you do have the time and the inclination, please stick around. I'll be right back with the Craic. Right back with the Craic. May have to make that a mainstay of this show. Immediately after this final show, final word from our key show sponsor, the fine folks at MB Crusher. Good morning, good morning, good morning. How the devil are we all doing today? Now, I'm going to go back to the beginning of the chat, but before I get there, I want to highlight one from Mick Norton, because Mick did send me a message this morning that I've literally not had a chance to read yet, but it is all to do with selector grabs. And he recaps it here. Reference selector grabs and thorough examination. HSE confirmed to me yesterday that selector grabs are considered as accessories for lifting and are subject to requirements for thorough examination as outlined in paragraphs 27 to 29 of ACOP of the ACOP to Lola. If that means anything to you, if you are using selector grabs and you were unsure about whether they needed to be examined on a regular basis, now you know. Mick, I will take a closer look at that. But because I had bits and pieces to do this morning, I prepared today's show last night, and I've literally just walked into the office and made a start. So I will come back to you on that in the fullness of time. Now, let me go back to the very, very beginning. Our quizmaster was first off the mark this morning. Morning, Gary. Another fantastic question, and we'll come back to that in just a second. Mick Norton was second off the mark. Nice to see you as well, Mick. Thank you for your participation. I've just mentioned the question of the day, and that was it. This is Gary's. What is your most significant career accomplishment? Very, very quickly. I was working with somebody else at the time, a guy called Matt Malloy. Still see him from time to time, but we parted amicably. But yeah, I was working with Matt at the time, and somebody nominated us. I can't even remember who it was, but somebody nominated us for a social media week award. I think this is 2009 or thereabouts. So we were sent some documentation on what it was that we were doing, and at the time we were basically starting the Diggers and Dozers YouTube channel. So we were going out filming equipment, explaining equipment, and all that kind of thing. And we entered and kind of forgotten about it. And then we got an invitation to the actual event itself, and we said, well, we'll pop along just to network a bit. And lo and behold, we won the bloody thing. Unbelievable. To the point where, it wasn't the sort of thing where you do an Oscar-style speech. I'd like to thank my mum and my dad and all that kind of thing. But we were literally completely unprepared. We were sat right at the very back, and they announced that Diggers and Dozers won. And both of us are looking a little bit dishevelled because we've been in the bar before. Meandered down to the front and said, thank you for our trophy, and then went down the pub. Brilliant. So, yes, I'm going to come to yours in a minute. What is your most significant career accomplishment? Jim Turner is in the house. And Jim, listen, that's why this show works. That is why this show works. I am very, very pro demolition in virtually every aspect of my daily life. But I do realise, and Jim is very good to point it out, there are times when demolition is not appropriate, and I'll gladly take that on the chin. That's why we have comments. That's why we have feedback, because this is your show more than it is mine. I just press the buttons, but you're the people out at the sharp end and at the coalface. Ken Hatter is in the house. Now, what does that mean? Lots of cloud, then a little bit of sun, and then a bit more cloud. Probably about the same as it is here, actually. Good morning. It certainly is a house of fun today. I try to make it a house of fun every day, but sometimes it's a little harder than others. Dan Cullen, good morning, Dan. Greatest accomplishment, says Ken Hatcher, driving a backhoe. And see, it seems, when you think about that, just in its purest sense, that doesn't sound like much of a career accomplishment. Lots of people drive backhoe loaders. But imagine, and I'm sure Ken is one of those, imagine you were one of those that grew up watching maybe your dad or your grandfather or your uncle or just somebody in your town operating a backhoe loader and thinking, I'd like to do that. And then one day somebody says, there you go, there's a set of keys. Go and operate a backhoe loader. That must feel like you're king of the world. So well done on that one, Ken. Mark Whiting's here as well. Morning, Mark. Andy Darvell says, good morning, you lovely people. I think he must be talking about you lot. Let's have a look. Question of the day. Ken Hatcher comes back and says, becoming an adult education tutor. Did not know you were an adult education tutor. Is that in plant and equipment, or is that in something else? Is there a secret skill that you have that you're teaching people? We need to know. This is going back to our this day in history. 300,000 gallons of porter ale cascading down the streets of London after a vat burst. And apparently 8 people were killed. By the sound of it, they either drowned or were crushed by the onset of the rushing tidal wave tsunami of ale. And then one died a few days later of alcohol poisoning. I can just imagine this guy running out of his front door with buckets, just collecting the porter as it flowed past his house. Free beer for all, I say. There is Mick Norton talking about selector grabs. I've just had a very quick look while I was messing about. Apparently this has been in conversation for quite some time. I'm fairly sure I read that 175 days. Quite why it takes 175 days to get an answer out of the HSE or anybody else, frankly, I've no idea. No idea at all. But thank you for the update, Mika, and I will have a closer look at that in a second. Wow, there's a double achievement from Andy Darvell, getting all heights high reach ticket, which is an accomplishment in itself, and passing out as a firefighter, an even bigger one, I would say. Question of the day, Dan Cullen. I'm just a high profile guy. Yes, you are. I can't argue with that. Let's have a look. Yes, I didn't say hello to Dan when he first arrived, because I get confused when everyone... That is the problem. I have buttons. I have buttons for all of our regulars so that I can just press them. But the problem is, that, as I've explained before, when this show starts, it sends out a signal to 3 Facebook pages, to YouTube, to Twitter, and to LinkedIn. And there's like a delay. So when I go live, there's about a 15 to 20 second delay before those platforms are notified, at which point everybody logs on. So it starts out, Gary arrived, and then Mick arrived, and then everyone else arrived, and I'm literally just watching these names go past, trying to press the right buttons as they do so. So my apologies. Question of the day, Gary Muirhead, who came up with the question, but here's his answer. Working on the construction of the new total gas processing plant in Shetland Island. I'm so glad I could say I was part of that. I think that's one of the things that we miss when we are trying to convince young people to be part of this industry. I think we miss a lot of tricks in that. But that ability, and let's use HS2 as an example, because it did attract a lot of young people, and it will still be, even though Manchester and the Manchester and the Leeds bits are not now happening, there will be a lot of young people that go through that, a lot of apprentices and stuff. You imagine in 20, 30, 40 years' time, being able to say to both your children and your grandchildren, we're going on the HS2, we're going from London to Birmingham. Don't know where Manchester came from. We're going from London to Birmingham, or Birmingham to London, on the HS2, the high-speed rail network. And I helped build that. I was on this project. This project exists in part because of me. Wouldn't that be a marvellous thing? Wouldn't that? Don't think we say that enough. Let's have a look. Jim Turner, absolutely spot on bit of footage. Plenty of very sound shells of buildings that will be much better repurposed sooner than knocked down. And it's hard to argue with that. But I would draw you a comparison, okay? And I realise there are pros and cons. I'm not, in the same way that I don't believe there should be a blanket ban on demolition, I do not believe that there should be a blanket ban going the other way. I don't think we should assume that everything needs to be demolished. But one of the projects I visited a few years ago was what used to be Fortress Wapping. So it was the head office of the News of the World, the Sun, and the Times. For those of you of a certain age, you will remember that Rupert Murdoch and his group basically broke the back of the print unions and moved away from Fleet Street down to Wapping. And part of the deal at Wapping was that you had the journalists in the same building as the newspapers were produced. It wasn't a case of they were produced in Fleet Street and then sent off to a printer to be actually printed and distributed. Everything took place at Wapping. And the problem with that was newspaper print presses, and there were many of them, are huge and incredibly heavy. So they'd installed these things at Fortress Wapping, and the upper floors. I what was her name? The ginger bird, Rebecca. Somebody, I think, Rebecca Brooks was it, who was the editor of the News of the World when all of that went on. I went into her office just before it was demolished, and Squib Group did the demolition. Did a fantastic job. But they'd had structural engineers. Now, bearing in mind, this is right on the River Thames. Prime real estate. We're talking prime real estate. But because of the way that was built, basically the building couldn't be used for anything else. There was no way on God's green earth that the ground floor and the first floor could be used for anything else. The floors were the floor slabs were enormous, rock solid reinforced concrete. You couldn't run a cable through them or anything. It was literally a case of, there is nothing here we can do. And there was talk at one point about turning it into some sort of concert venue. And I think they even talked about holding the X Factor finals in this building. But ultimately, everybody agreed the only way we're going to be able to do anything with this is basically go back to square one, knock the whole thing down. And I think there's now, I think there's a hotel, and I think there's some housing there as well. Now, as I say, I'm not suggesting that every building has those challenges. But also, when you think about what you need to do in order to bring some buildings up to spec. The building I'm thinking of here, when I first started as a journalist, I worked in a place called Quadrant House. There's a 19-story building and there's a 7-story one beside it, and all of that was filled with magazines. It isn't any longer. There's hardly any magazines published there at all. Great swathes of it are empty, to the point where I even considered actually renting an office there just to go back and be in my old haunt to prove that I was still going, even if the magazines I worked on weren't. It was a stupid idea, but that was an office block, as I say, a 19-story and a 7-story, built in the 1980s, early 1980s. And at the time, an absolute state-of-the-art building, but it wouldn't meet housing regs, it wouldn't meet thermal regs, it wouldn't meet sustainability regs, it wouldn't meet any regs at all. So in order to actually bring that up to spec, you're going to have to strip out a huge amount of it, which is partial demolition, let's face it, when you're doing soft strips and all that sort of stuff. You've then got to put in a whole new bunch of material. That material is going to come from somewhere. You've got to get it out the ground or wherever it is you get it from, and you've got to make it and manufacture it and deliver it and install it. Are we doing the maths correctly is the question I would ask. Mick Norton, back on our question today. Construction of a feeder road and bridges through tropical rainforest on the island of, is that Malaita? In the Solomon Islands in 1971. Just me and 150 local labour force with 300 inches of rain a year to contend with. All communications in Pidgin English. A lot like this show. Yeah. Malaita, I've never heard of it. But then I've never been to the Solomon Islands, so maybe that explains it. Chris Ford, his greatest career accomplishment, 40 years of banging his head against a wall. That's business for you. It's construction business for you. Dan Cullen, I think this reuse building is a farce, as these buildings are built or office use, for office use rather, and these office buildings are over 20 years old. See, now there is a curb that we could put in, I would say. We have this constant need for renewal, particularly in commercial buildings. And you look in, I always refer to London, but I'm sure the other bits of the country, the other major urban conurbations are exactly the same. But it's not unusual for a commercial building to be built in London, and within 20, 25, 30 years, it's deemed no longer fit for purpose. Take it down. But that is not the fault of the demolition contractor. Ultimately, the demolition contractor is only clearing up the mess left by somebody else. So if we have a situation where buildings are only lasting for 20, 25 or 30 years, Let's look to the architects, the very people that are trying to outlaw demolition, and say, why are you building buildings? Why do you lack the foresight to build buildings or specify buildings that are only going to last for 2 decades or 3 decades? Surely, with all of the qualifications that you have, you must be able to build buildings that will last way longer than 20 years. You will know, surely, the way that the wind is blowing in terms of future regulations on carbon, sustainability, thermal, and all of those sort of things. Overspec it now and let it last for 50, 100 years. Don't spec it for the next fortnight. Because if you do, that's when demolition has to come to your aid. Hello, says Peter McKenna. Good morning, Peter. I didn't see you arrive, but you're welcome nonetheless. Definitely British, definitely brilliant machines. I'd sooner be on my old Hitachi with over 7,500 hours on it than any other brand new JCB. Oh, that's fighting talk, but Hitachi do make a damn fine machine, I have to say. Mick Norton says, I found the Hitachi range of 360s amongst the most robust and reliable in the UK. Encon attachments looks very good, especially with sales and training on tap as part of the deal. Yeah, although I did find it interesting that the guy in the video referred to it as Engcon. Now, I've always assumed that it's Encon. Am I right, or is he right? If anyone knows. Komatsu are definitely one of my go-to marks. They should be one of everyone's go-to marks. Komatsu make fantastic machines, and I make no secret of the fact, love me a Liebherr, love me a Volvo, but Komatsu make a damn fine machine across the board. Komatsu mini excavators, fantastic. Komatsu wheel loaders, fantastic. Big Komatsu mining trucks, fantastic. Their excavators, fantastic. And the IMC, as I say, I've been writing about that IMC system for, well, basically as long as it's been in existence. They launched it, and I've followed it through its various iterations. I also did an interview with one of the guys that was pioneering the smart construction thing. That was 2 ConExpos ago, and they've been at the very cutting edge. I think the world is just waking up and realising, actually, Komatsu were dead right about some of this stuff. Jim Turner back on all things reuse and recycling. We need planning to build a building that we have to prove good reason for what we want and how it should look. So planning should be needed to flatten the building as it's stored carbon. No argument whatsoever. Where I have the problem is this idea of we should assume that nothing should be demolished as our starting point, because there will be buildings that do need to be demolished. The other thing that occurred to me, and I'm writing another column, and I'm not entirely sure whether this will actually be in it, but I'm working on it at the moment. How does this potentially change the landscape of the demolition industry? You know, we've got half a dozen top-notch, 100 million a year plus demolition contractors, and then we've got everybody else. If we adopt a system whereby we are assuming that nothing should be demolished as our starting point, my guess is that we will lose some of those demolition contractors at the bottom end, either through, they just can't find any work, or they'll be snapped up by the bigger boys to give them local representation and that kind of thing. So what then happens when we do actually need some demolition on the hurry up, like a burned out building or a building that's been damaged by flood or whatever it might be? We need to think of these things. If we've decimated the demolition industry and then we require demolition, what are we going to do? Import it? Dan Cullen, it's like the fight they're having at Watford at the moment. 3 office blocks on hold from demolition due. Locals not wanting more high-rises in the area, but these blocks are not suitable for flats or reuse as windows and other major factors in the refurbishment. It's unreal, so they need demolition. And there's another point. Local residents don't want high-rises in the area. I watched a thing the other night, a documentary. I was only watching it out of one eye because my wife had it on and I was doing something else. But they were talking about the gentrification of Hackney. Now, Hackney in London, I'm trying to think of the nice way of saying it, but basically, for years, it's been an absolute shithole. If anyone knows Hackney, you'll know. If you live in Hackney, my apologies, but it's not the best. Fantastic pie and mash there, but not much else, and it's being gentrified. What happens to the people that lived there? That was the basic premise of the program. But then, even setting that aside, we do have this thing in the UK of NIMBYism. You know, we all want wind turbines to provide our electricity, but don't put one anywhere near me. We all want access to well-regulated waste facilities, but don't put one anywhere near me. We know that we need housing, low-cost, affordable housing for lots and lots of people, but don't be putting them anywhere near me. I live in Watford. I live in the posh part. I don't want to open the windows or the curtains on my five-bedroom house and look out in the distance to see a high-rise tower block. People got to live somewhere, people. Dan Cullen says, demolition as a whole needs to come together and explain to these numerics. Not entirely. Is that trying to work out what that is? Try and explain. It's not feasible and quicker to be demolished and start anew, creating more jobs and keeping the economy moving. That's part of it. The other part of it as well, which, and again, I don't think the demolition industry is covering itself in glory at the moment. You think about, we live on an island with finite resources and finite space. So by and large, particularly if you're talking about London, Birmingham, Manchester, Leeds, Newcastle, Glasgow, Edinburgh, Dundee, all of those places, if you're going to build anything of any significance, chances are something else is coming down. When that building comes down, and we have an entire sector of the demolition industry that has now been set up to do this, when that building comes down, all of that material, or about 98% of it, is taken away and then put into something else. It's either put back onto the site where that building's come down, or it's used elsewhere. Demolition is a vital source of secondary materials. Nobody seems to be shouting about that. And if you take that away, if you suddenly say, blanket ban, no more demolition, what does that mean? What it means is if you're going to build anything new, you are then going to have to go and quarry or mine the materials to make it. What is the carbon impact of that? Because once you've got that material out of the ground, you've got to process it, you've got to deliver it, you've got to install it. What is the carbon impact of that? Why is nobody talking about that from the demolition point of view? I love the electric machine, says Ken Hatcher. Good. Make sure you tune in tomorrow night. The big but, aside from Kim Kardashian, is where all the electric is coming from. They weren't far off the limit last night. Yeah, and we are getting to that point of the year where, we will be right up against the lights going out. Was that a steel wrist I saw fitted on that Volvo electric mini excavator? I don't know, was it? I wasn't paying that close attention. But if you spotted a steel wrist, Gary, bearing in mind your love of all things green and black, I will take your word for it that it was there. Mick Saunders says, morning all, the hound needed to cock his leg just before the start today. I'm with the hound. So did I. Peter McKenna, don't we all? Not sure what that may well be relating to cocking of the leg. We'll be okay tonight though, as the wind has picked up, says Ken Hatcher. See, Ken Hatcher, the weather watcher and the sprocket watcher. Dan Cullen, looking on the other, I'm on the other side of the fence operating that piece of kit. Looks absolutely awesome. Yeah, the L95, terrific, really is. That's a beast. I was watching a video about it yesterday. That was the Senebogen, I think. And Dan Cullen, that's what we were talking about. Cool video, great music, awesome machines. Totally agree. Peter McKenna, 70% less emissions than a standard diesel engine. Is that electric machines? Don't know. I see Canary Wharf is in the debate on how to reuse the buildings. Now, much of the offices are empty as they're moving back to the square mile. Yeah. Now, I mean, I had a friend. I've been to Canary Wharf a few times. The actual, what is the big one? Is that just called Canary Wharf, or is it? I can't remember the big one where the Daily Telegraph used to be. I don't think it's there anymore. But I had a friend that worked on the Daily Telegraph, and I used to go there occasionally for lunch. And it's a phenomenal building. You know, it really is a marvel of engineering. I saw it go up because I was writing about construction in the 80s and so on down the line. Does that really become housing? Is that appropriate for housing? I don't know how many stories tall it is, but is that really, would you want to live there? I'm thinking probably not. So what's the alternative? My blanket is keeping me warm. I've not been outside for 5 days. Can't wait to get rid of this bug. No, I bet. Having said that, being tucked up under a blanket, no bad thing in my opinion. Tom Whiting explaining on all things selector grabs. It means 6 monthly checks for grabs. How does it work for shears? Etc. Mick, if you're still watching, please let us know. Mick Norton is correct. I've known this for a few years, says Mick Saunders. Peter McKenna, you're spot on there, Mick Norton. How people can think they shouldn't be tested and subject to regular maintenance is beyond me. Having had a good look over the Volvo electric machines, they are absolutely brilliant if you have a 125 amp 3-phase available. Yes, but I certainly agree with the first point. They are absolutely brilliant. I've taken a spin in a few and they are top notch. A question today: when I finally pass my Halo course and at 72 I can still jump if I wanted to. Don't do that. Let's have a look. Overcoming my disability. Now that is an achievement in itself. My youngest daughter is deaf in one ear, but is quite the singer. So she actually went to music college to study music, even though obviously not being able to hear, not the ideal, but she did very well. So yeah. Question today: my greatest accomplishment is being brought into the world and learning new things every day in life. Lifelong learners. See, they're my people. I finish up here, and I have to do a few bits and pieces for tomorrow's show and various other bits and pieces. But when 5:30, 6 o'clock rolls around, I'm sat there with a laptop and I'm teaching myself new things. You know, how to make this look better, how to get the best out of the camera, how to get the best out of the microphone, but then a whole other bunch of stuff, you know, how to get more views on YouTube and Instagram and how to drive the business forward. I'm constantly consuming information. Jim Turner, question of the day: I really can't think of anything I've done that's noteworthy. The only thing I'll claim is sticking my lad in the seat of everything possible, and he has a better understanding of machines and operating them, so he's better prepared for his working life. I realise that doesn't necessarily abide by the rules that Gary Muirhead set out, you know, your greatest career accomplishment, but surely anyone's greatest accomplishment, if you are a parent, is precisely that, setting them up for a future in the world. So hats off indeed. Peter McKenna, if I was to admit to helping build construction projects, I'll be stuck to finding just one that I was chuffed to be part of, because as an HGV driver, I've delivered equipment to demolish things, equipment and materials to build things, and equipment materials and machines to maintain things. I think one of the most iconic buildings I've helped demo process was Ernie at Blackpool. I remember Ernie, the old Premium Bonds building. The most iconic building would be the new Wembley Stadium. I've got a piece of the old Wembley Stadium sat behind the camera there, actually. I can't reach it. I'll show it to you, but I can't reach it, but I have. The difference is, Mark, the materials used 200 years ago were actually better than materials in use today. Now, if anything comes out of this whole retrofit first thing, I wouldn't be at all upset if we went back to the old way of looking at things. If you go back, and this is, I'm merely quoting Terry Cornby here, but if you go back to Victorian times, or if you are confronted with taking down a Victorian building, you can reuse pretty much everything. You've got no asbestos to worry about, no plastics to worry about, nothing like that. So you've got timber, you've got stone, you've got glass, and pretty much the entire lot. I mean, like 99.9% of that can be reused. You fast forward to a building that was built this side of 1980, and you've got composite materials, you've got plastics, you've got polystyrene, you've got all of these things that you could do absolutely sod all with. So the question goes back to architects. I realise that we need insulation and all of those things, but when you're designing your next bunch of houses, your next office block, think about the fact that at some point that building, whatever its purpose is, will no longer be fit for that purpose. And some poor bugger is going to have to come along and try and knock that down. And he's going to have to knock it down and deal with materials that you insisted on being in there But you're now using those materials to point the finger at Demolition for being environmentally unsound. The blame lies with construction. All Demolition is doing is clearing up the mess left behind by other processes. Andy Darvell, we've knocked down 4 office blocks on Station Road in Cambridge just so all the new buildings look the same. One of them was less than 10 years old and was basically brand new. Bloody ridiculous, but money talks. See, now that is where I would... knocking them down so they all look the same. That makes no sense. Don't do that. I 100% agree with that. Peter McKenna says in Preston, if they want to get rid of old listed buildings to create new space for new buildings, normally involves a suspicious, catastrophic fire. Weird how often that happens, isn't it? Leading to them being demolished. Obviously, no one will admit these fires are deliberately set, but everyone knows on the quiet. Such a shame we've lost some beautiful buildings in Preston and elsewhere that could have been repurposed that have stood the test of time. Can't argue with that one bit. Definitely, Peter McKenna took a building down in Cambridge city centre near King's College. God knows why it wasn't listed. It was a couple of 100 years old, 18-inch solid brick walls and solid riveted thick old steel with extra plates on top and bottom of the beams. I've never worked on a harder building. They don't build them like that anymore. No, they do not. No, they do not. I'm just going to answer this one very quickly. How's Mrs. Demo's back today? Well, on the basis that she's gone out, I'm assuming better. Not cured, but better. Mick Saunders, Hackney, God almighty no. Took me years to get out of there, and if I had the money, I would never go back. Don't get me started on Diane Abbott. Nobody wants to start on Diane Abbott, let's be honest. AI has gone mad. A leading UK private boarding school has named an artificial intelligent robot as its deputy head and awarded it a salary. Advice on supporting staff members, helping pupils and writing school policies. I'm losing the will to live. Is that right? That sounds like something out of the Sunday Sport. Deaf people make amazing musicians, Mark. They do. Listen, I've got no... And when you think some of the, particularly in rock bands, a lot of those are rendered deaf by their occupation. Dave Grohl, lead singer of the Foo Fighters, is struggling with deafness and tinnitus and all the things that go with it. But if you were deaf and you were choosing your career path, and I mean, she doesn't sing professionally now anyway, but if you're choosing your career path, would you necessarily choose something that requires you to have very good hearing? Probably not. Peter McKenna says, look how many Victorian buildings and infrastructure are still in use today. How many buildings in our era are still standing today? Yeah. And I think some of the buildings that we are building today will only be around in decades' time, because either they are too awkward to demolish, the Shard being an obvious example, or the fact that they are considered too iconic. And I would, again, say the Shard and the walkie-talkie and the gherkin and the cheese grater, all of those in the City of London, I think they've become so iconic that there would be great resistance to them actually being erased from the skyline. But as Peter McKenna says, will they be standing 200 years' time? No, they will not. Mick Norton says, link to Lola ACOP, and there's the link. Go to paragraphs 27 to 29 to see which attachments apply. It is a comprehensive list. I will check that out after the show. So that's an hour. I need to go and make sure that my other half is okay. But before I leave, let me very quickly remind you, we have a show tomorrow night. We've got a show tomorrow morning, and we're going to show on Thursday morning as well. We've got a show tomorrow night, which is on electrics. We've got a show on Thursday night, which is on the top-down way demolition method, pioneered over in Italy. But there is no show whatsoever on Friday. Ken Hatcher, are you listening? No show on Friday. Mick Saunders, talking of demo buildings, you're only going to look at Canary Wharf. Most of the smaller buildings from the start of it have gone, and the ones being put up will be gone. Yeah, very true. Very true. I have to say, though, I do have a bit of a soft spot for not just Canary Wharf, but the whole of the Docklands, because I joined Contract Journal in 1987. I think it was 1987. And I basically spent the first my first year as a journalist basically going in and out of Canary Wharf and the London Docklands, because it seemed like every other day there was a new building being topped out, or a foundation stone being laid, or the first sod being turned by a local politician or the local dignitary or whatever it might be, which is why I ended up drinking way too much champagne, and which is why I ended up having to quit alcohol altogether. That's a whole other story. But yeah, I basically arrived on Contract Journal at the very, very height, the very apex of all the development in London's Docklands. So yeah, I've got very fond memories of all of that. And bearing in mind, my dad grew up in Tower Bridge Road, so you know, I think he has a slightly different view of the docks of London. His dad was actually a docker for a while, so I think he had a different view of the docks and how they were refurbished, regenerated, gentrified, and all, and you know, and I'm going back to the 80s now. You know, £1 million apartments, you know, filled with yuppies and that kind of thing. Not entirely sure they were necessarily a good thing, but the way that came together, and as I say, I was right at the heart of it. I contributed nothing towards it, but I was there. I was literally in and out of London almost on a daily basis, quaffing champagne at 7 o'clock in the morning. Machine drivers in London have the easy job, yet taking said machines into London and other areas is a major undertaking. Yeah, and also getting machines and materials, particularly waste out of London sites, absolute bloody nightmare. So thank you for that, Sadiq. You've done a fine job. Top of the construction and demolition industry's Christmas card list, I have no doubt. Right, people, go and have a good day. Stay wrapped up, because it is parky out there, as my dad used to say. I'll be back here tomorrow, and I'll be back here twice. Let's have a look. Exonders, did you know the old dockers' houses here are nearing 1 million? I wouldn't be surprised. I wouldn't be at all surprised. I mean, my dad grew up in the last house in a little tiny side road called Green Walk in Bermondsey, and it was council accommodation, but I don't know how they managed to pull it off. But my dad and his mum and dad lived on the top floor, and his aunt, uncle, and cousin, who also ended up being his best man at his wedding, lived on the ground floor. Outside toilet, the whole kit and caboodle. I had reason to go there not so long ago. Basically, I was passing. I thought I'll go and take a look. And there was a Porsche parked outside. It's come a long way. Right, folks, take care. Yes. I'm going to put this up on the screen because I've no idea what this guy's problem is. What does that mean? Why would you do that? I'm going to give you the benefit of the doubt and suggest that maybe you're not fully conversant with the English language, but why pitch up right at the very end of a live stream and be a dick? Why would you do that? Stay safe, people, and catch you all later. Yeah, catch you all later, except the guy whose comment I just put up. He can go forth in short, jerky movements. I'll see you all tomorrow twice, and I'll see you on Thursday twice. Till then, have a good one. All the best.